Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a few side issues around the critical shortage of lorry drivers that Brexit has tipped well over the edge, including the ill feeling that now exists within the industry with all the staff poaching going on. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. 100,000 lorry drivers short of where the industry reckons we need to be. The shortage can essentially be grouped into three main sources. One, not enough people wanting to be lorry drivers. Crap pay, crap work, plays merry hell with your social and family life. Secondly, the pandemic meant that a lot of potentially new drivers weren't able to sit their test for the HGV licence. And, well, the third thing to say is, although those other two are also the case throughout Europe, but in Europe they don't have critical shortages like we do here. So what's the actual difference? What's turned it into a serious problem is Brexit cutting off our supply of EU drivers. So we need more drivers on the road. Otherwise, the shortages that have been becoming more noticeable on an almost weekly basis recently are just going to carry on getting worse. And I will just add, before I go on there, another aspect of Brexit we need to be mindful of. It's not just cutting off access to drivers from the EU. When I say we need drivers on the road, we need drivers on the road rolling. Because because of Brexit again, drivers are often stuck on the road, not going anywhere. So when they're not rolling, it's like you haven't got one at all. Now, right now, the plan seems to be to introduce checks on quite a few EU goods coming into the country in October. That will make the situation way worse, as it will keep even more lorry drivers stuck in queues, which, remember, is the second part of that Brexit problem with driver shortages, going nowhere very slowly. The problem is that we're not getting those drivers. The government continue to deny that the problem exists. Tory MP Andrew Bridgen last week said in an interview that we had 600,000 qualified drivers in the country. No, we don't. We did do. But then Brexit happened. Also, it makes no difference how many drivers we have. Even if it is accurately reported, what matters is how many you have compared to how many you need. And we did get away with 600,000. Even 600,000, according to the industry, was considered not quite enough. We could still have done with more, but we didn't have these critical shortages when we had 600,000. Bear in mind now that if we had the same number of drivers now that we did before Brexit, we'd still have problems because, remember, more lorry drivers are stuck in queues now. So we actually need more, So in terms of the answer to the question, how many lorry drivers do we have compared to how many we need? Not enough. So let's imagine that you are the Minister for Transport. Doesn't even matter if you're as thick as the current one, Grant Shapps. The Minister doesn't need to identify problems or solutions. Civil servants do that for them. They just have to decide which solution to apply. So let's consider where we could get drivers from. The first obvious source is the potential drivers who have been unable to sit their test due to COVID. The problem is that our capacity is still hampered here. Tests can now take place, but the last I heard, not at the same rate as before COVID. And even if it was at the same rate, we sort of need to go faster, but we haven't got the capacity to go faster. So what the government have done there, this is the only source where they've actually done anything, is to announce measures to make the tests easier. But of course, that just risks having insufficiently skilled drivers in charge of tens of tons of payload on the roads and doesn't seem to do much to help with the backlog. Unless, of course, the idea is that the easier tests don't take as long and you won't have as many people fail. And so you can carry more of them out and get more drivers on the road, as ill-advised as that might be if those drivers aren't up to the task. But that still means that our roads are going to be less safe. It's not immediately obvious to me how having lorries crash into other lorries and blocking roads for the rest of the lorries in the area is helping. Needless to say, I haven't seen any reports from any one representative of the haulage industry saying that they think this will deal with the issue. But more drivers passing their tests will at least contribute to helping because some of those drivers will be suitable. But final point on this, it does mean inexperienced drivers, even if they would have passed the more rigorous test. You always need new drivers to replace retiring ones, but you would like to limit the proportion of drivers on the road that are inexperienced. The second source might be qualified drivers who left the profession because it's crap. Now, according to the Road Haulage Association, we've got about 516,000 people in Britain having a HGV licence. As I say, we had 600,000 before COVID and Brexit. Now, without worrying about how many we need ideally, what we can say is having 600,000 in the past allowed us to manage. Now we need more because more are stuck. So we need at least 600,000. We need 600,000 plus. We've got 516. That means that we are well short. So even if you could persuade qualified drivers who are no longer driving to return with better pay and conditions, you can't solve the problem from this source entirely or even close to it. But let us say it might help. I can't find any figures on how many drivers might be tempted back if the pay and conditions were better. But what I can say is two things. Firstly, the pay has been rising for quite a few employers, the big ones, and this has involved poaching staff from elsewhere, the likes of McDonald's, Tesco, Aldi and so on, offering much better pay for their drivers. People have been leaving smaller operators to join them. Makes sense, get more money. But the thing is that those smaller operators haven't been able to replace them. In fact, it appears to be causing a lot of friction within the industry. I see that those smaller operators are a little bit annoyed with losing their staff to larger ones with deeper pockets. And the pressure's really getting to them. But the bottom line is they can't find any evidence that the higher pay is encouraging more people back into the profession in significant numbers, just moving them from one place to another, maintaining the overall level of shortage nationally. Now, it might be that the smaller operators can't afford to pay more without pricing themselves out the market. So what could the government do there? Again, you Transport Minister, you're thinking, okay, we've left it to businesses, they've gone as far as they can, what can we do? Well, I've already said before that the government could give tax breaks to lorry drivers instead of billionaires. How about that? Instead of letting the already wealthy off with paying their due to keep society chugging along, target tax breaks at key workers where there's a severe shortage. How about that? Tax breaks for lorry drivers would mean that the same pay would suddenly be worth more for them in their pocket. And it would avoid having to increase the cost of transport and the subsequent knock-on increase to the cost of food. Then the third source would be encouraging new drivers to take up the profession. Now, this is a long-term one. It takes time to train them. But it is a long-term problem as well as a critical short-term one. Again, the obvious solution here is to make the job pay better, ideally with a better work-life balance. Though that's always going to be a bit rubbish for a job like this. You've also got to remember it's extra difficult now to persuade people to do the job of a lorry driver, unless it's really good pay, because there's now job shortages in lots of industries for work that may not be brilliantly paid either, but is potentially got a better work-life balance than lorry driving. So it's extra difficult at the moment, I would have suggested. So what you're going to need is a national recruitment strategy. So again, what can the government do here? The tax breaks would have to be part of it. We're paying them to train. You can't just pretend that market forces don't exist, which is odd. We have a Tory government right now that seems to ignore market forces. But anyway, they could just nationalise road freight, handle the whole thing themselves. If they think the answer is just paying people more, fine. Have a nationalised road freight industry and you just pay them whatever you want. Not sure I see that one happening. But they should have a government recruitment and training programme instead of telling businesses to do it. Obviously, if it's in a business's interest to do it, they do it. The point of government is to handle what the private sector can't manage or won't because there's no inducement for them to. Needless to say, the government are doing nothing in this direction at all. Then the fourth source would be existing drivers overseas. This is what road haulage bosses want. The haulage industry has asked for visas for lorry drivers, but the government have refused. Now, this isn't a case of granting visas and we suddenly get all those EU lorry drivers back. Don't think we will. Even if the government did back down and change their immigration policy for these workers, it is too much of a pain for EU lorry drivers now. They don't like being stuck in the queues. They don't get paid for that. They can't. There's no cabotage anymore. They can't make the money. So we would need to go further afield. We're not just suddenly going to tempt those EU lorry drivers back in large numbers. So we'll probably have to go to Asia. But that would at least allow the industry to attract some of the drivers that we need. At the end of the day, if there are fewer qualified people in the country than we need, then the only answer is to get people from outside the country. It's all right talking about training a domestic workforce. That's fine for the long term if you've got a strategy, which we don't, but it doesn't help you in the short term. And at the moment, we haven't got a looming crisis. This isn't like Afghanistan where the government had 18 months and then all of a sudden did nothing for 17 months and 2 weeks. This is a problem right now, although they had, as much warning for this. So in the short term, if you want more drivers, the only way to get them is to go where the drivers are. And they're not even pursuing that policy. The government's digging its heels in on this one as well. So correct me if I'm wrong, but those would appear to be the main sources of new drivers that are possible. And as the government are doing nothing to help with any of those sources, I suppose bar one, but you would argue that, well, certainly the haulage industry argues that is dangerously hindering, then we're just not going to have enough for the demand we have right now. So that would only leave reducing demand. If you cannot increase your supply, you have to reduce your demand. Now, how could we do that? I guess they could initiate another lockdown due to their current negligence in choosing not to suppress the rate of COVID infection. We're going to be in a very scary place in a month's time. But I don't know that would be less politically damaging for the government than leaving us with food shortages. Also in October, we'll be having those EU checks taking place. But yeah, which would be worse for them? Severe food shortages, much worse than now, or another lockdown. A lot of Tories hate face masks in the pub, being closed more than they fear the starvation of their voters, it seems. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.